All right. Maureen, do you want to kick us off, or do you want me to just?
That's fine. Welcome to the October meeting of the Cedar Rapids Community School Audit Committee. This month, as usual, we're doing our yearly orientation meeting for our members, and I'll turn the floor over to Dave, who is going to lead us through it.
Thank you, Maureen. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad you all joined the orientation meeting. We're going to kind of be jumping in and out of different documents because it's going to be a little bit different. We are a little behind where we normally would be with because of the rollout of our new software. We don't have all of our line item budget documents updated for this year yet. We're in the process of the changeover with the new system, so it's taken us a little while to get everything set up. So we're going to be looking at last year's documents some, and then I'm also going to pull into kind of where we ended up in FY21 with a report, a PowerPoint that I shared with our board. And we'll kind of go into that when we're really looking at basically our general fund discussion a little bit. I'll probably jump to that document, but I do want to we're going to use our website as a guiding tool, and just to highlight some of the information, I'm going to talk a little bit about school finance as we're going through that and how that ties into it, and what are the parameters that we have to deal with and work with on the school finance formula in doing this. And so I'm kind of going to start off. I'm going to kind of share my screen, and I'm going to first off, let's go to this. Well, is this the right screen? Can you see what screen do you guys see?
Blue.
A white screen?
It's all blue.
All blue.
Yep.
All right, so let's see here. If I pull my documents up and move it over there, then I'll know.
Oh, Dave, this reminds me of the last 10 minutes at our house. So now I don't feel bad.
All right. So I'm going to go back home. We're in. Can you guys see the district website?
Yeah.
Perfect. So this is our new website. Actually, this just got launched earlier. We're in October now, but last month it got launched. And so how you get to the budget area is we're going to go to departments, accounting and budgeting. And we're in accounting and budgeting here. So these will be updated with FY22, but this is kind of our what was out there for last year, and these have not been updated yet, but we will get that updated. But first of all, I'm going to jump into all funds and just kind of jump in here a little bit. We talked a little bit about this. We talked about this last year as well. And Angela, being new, you're going to probably see some of this for the first time. You might know some of this, but if not, hopefully you'll learn something from this. But we basically, as a school district, we have, there are like 8 different fund types and that we currently use in our district. There are more, but basically 8 funds that we use. We have the general fund, which is pretty much all of our staff, curriculum, and utilities, and all of that kind of flow in the general fund. We have special revenue types. There are student activity fund and management, our special revenue. We actually have some student activity fund, explanatory. Management fund basically takes care of our health insurance, not health insurance, general liability insurance, unemployment. If we have a lawsuit that we have to pay something from our district, that gets paid out of management fund. Capital projects funds, we have 2 of those that are SAVE fund, which is a sales tax revenue fund that we that can be used for building equipment, technology, buses, and those types of things can be taken out of the SAVE. And PEPL is a physical plant and equipment levy, and that can be used in the same way as SAVE. They're pretty interchangeable for the most part, but SAVE, we have identified, we have some things that we have identified to go out of SAVE, and one of the big things that we're using SAVE fund is for our elementary master facility plan, building new elementary schools is basically how we're using our saved funds moving forward. And we do still have technology and those types of things coming out of it. Debt service is the fund that we have to pay all of our principal and interest payments. Any debt the district has to get paid out of debt service. So the two funds that their debt service can be self-supporting in the fact that if you have a general obligation bonds, when you levy those bonds, that actually gets deposited into debt service. Those you can levy and then pay for it out of debt service. But if you are paying some debt that is secured by either SAVE or PEPL, you have to transfer the money out of SAVE or PEPL into debt service to make the bond payments, the debt payments. That's what has to happen, okay? So those are all the governmental fund categories. And you have proprietary fund categories. And those are our enterprise funds. They're like businesses, operate like a business. And we have our school nutrition fund is under that, and our daycare funds fall underneath that. And the fiduciary funds, which are basically funds that you manage for other people. We don't really have any of those now in the district, but that's where it would fall into if we did. So I'm going to scroll down here to talk a little bit about our general fund, and I'm going to jump into another document. So when you look at general fund is basically funded by enrollment accounts and a district cost per pupil, which is set by the state. So our enrollment is the main factor in determining our budget, okay? So our enrollment plays into it, and that's a part of the funding formula, which is a part of the general combined district cost, part of our funding formula. It's our enrollment plus weighted enrollments that you get additional weighted enrollments for special ed, for homeschool assistance. We get some enrollment for that. You know, those are the factors that kind of factor into our overall budget, and is all in the formula driven. So as you can see here, the levy rate to fund combined district costs. This is kind of our overall levy rate for the last through FY21 and FY22. Basically, is the same levy. We kept it pretty flat going into next year, so we didn't really do an increase. So when you're looking at these orange, that kind of ties out to the general fund levy components. You can see combined district cost levy, and that consists of school aid formula. These levies are generated through the formula, and the boards do have discretion on the budget guarantee component. And the budget guarantee means that you've lost enrollment. If you're qualifying a budget guarantee, you've lost enrollment. That it exceeds the increase in the allowable growth that the state gave. And we are on budget guarantee this year. This is the first year for several years that we haven't been on budget. We've been on budget guarantee because we did lose 614 kids due to COVID and derecho. We lost a significant amount of enrollment for FY22 that funds FY22, 614 kids. So that did push us into the a budget guarantee, and the board did pass a resolution to allow us to tap into the budget guarantee, which gives us funding at 1.1% above the last year's base state revenue that we received. So we get a 1% growth on a budget guarantee so that we don't fall behind. So that's only 1 year. So next year, if we end up in budget guarantee, if our numbers drop significantly more, then we would also qualify again for a budget guarantee for that next drop. We could qualify again. The other piece that drives a lot into the general fund is our instructional support levy. And that levy is something the board can adopt on their own up to 5 years. You can see that here. The board may approve up to 5 years, and the voters may actually approve it for a levy of 10 years. And it is up to 10% of the regular program funding. Okay, that is what how that is calculated. You can fund that in a combination of an income surtax or property tax. So a lot of schools, you'll find it's a mix, hit or miss. We do fund it in a combination between property taxes and income surtax. So if you think about it, when you file your taxes every year, there's always a question that says, what school district do you live in? That is why it's looking to see whether or not you have an income surtax, and you have to pay some taxes on for that for where you live. And so that is why you get that question, and that's how that plays into it. It funds part of our income support and instructional support levy. And that brings in about $8.5 million a year, give or take, and we use that for a variety of different things. A lot of it's like all day, everyday kindergarten is one of the factors. We do a lot of curriculum supports with that. We support guidance counselors, and so a lot of different things fall into those funding. We help support the Iowa Big program. Our expenses for Iowa Big program. It's a program that's offered to our secondary students. It's a kind of project-based type of program that kids learn by doing different projects. And so that's where a lot of that funding comes from. Supports comes out on ISL. Cash reserve levy is another component. And you see that line here where the levies or amounts are here. That is you got two pieces to that. You got authority-backed cash reserve levy, which means we're levying for things that we were granted additional authority for expenses beyond what we receive. Special ed is one area where we get a lot of that. Special ed is an area where we do go, it's a cash reserve levy, but it's authority-backed cash reserve levy. And we also have our ELL, our English language learners, kids. If we run a deficit there, we can actually do a levy, and that is through a cash reserve levy. The other piece is a cash reserve levy that is for cash flow purposes, okay? So, and to help make sure that you have enough money in the bank to be able to weather the summer months when you're not getting state aid, to pay all your bills. Because we pay our teachers July and August throughout the summer. We have a lot of expenses that occur throughout the summer. And we need additional funds in our coffers to be able to do that. And it also helps maintain our solvency ratio. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Having a good cash reserve levy can help maintain your solvency ratio as well. And there's also a limit that you can do. One of the things that never used to be there, and it's probably in the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, they've actually put a limit of what you can actually do a cash reserve levy for. And the limit is each year cannot exceed 20% of your prior year's expenditures, less your undesignated reserves that you have on the books. So it's amount that's in capping how much you can levy, because the state doesn't want you to continue to levy just whatever you want and keep building up cash reserves and cash balances and let it sit there. So they have put a cap on that, what you can do. Any questions? Please stop me at any time if you do have any questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going. And so when you look at this chart here are other levies that we have. We have our management fund levies. You can see where we have been in our levy. It's this is, like I said earlier, it's for our general liability insurance. It's for unemployment benefits, early retirement, cost for arbitration or cost of litigation that we had to pay off, pay a settlement or something that can come out of management fund levy. So for FY 21, our levy was $1.22 is for FY 21. And for FY 22, I have that number over here. Our management fund levy was $1.44. So it did increase a little bit for next year. The other ones we talked a little bit about, physical plant equipment levy. You can see that here. There's two parts. It's a regular program, physical plant equipment levy, which is board approved. That's 33 cents. The board has total control of that. Voter approved is exactly what that means. The voters have to approve it. We are at $1.34. You can see in FY 2015, we're at 67 cents. So a vote happened to allow us to go up to the maximum, which is $1.34. And And that will, I think that expires in 2000, or last year's the 2000 FY24, I believe. So we have to have that passed again to extend that going forward. It was a big challenge in the first time to pass it. It was at 67 cents for a long time. They did a vote and it failed one time, and they regrouped and got it passed the next time. It's very important. That is the fund that's really supporting our facilities, maintaining our facilities. It helps us purchase vehicles. We do, you know, all of our roofs, all our HVAC, all of those types of things get funded with out of the PEPAL fund.
Dave, can I interrupt you a minute?
Yep.
And this is my own ignorance. So the save fund is
Yep.
is state money coming in to the state collects it.
Yep. It's a state. Yeah, it is a statewide program now. Yes.
And I had not realized, so see, this is how long have we been on this committee? The PEBBLE is not, right? The
PEPAL is local revenue collected.
Okay,
Yep.
this is why this is so good. All right, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, PEPAL is a local tax. So everything that you pay taxes is all considered local funds. And we'll see this chart later on in the revenues, and where you'll see how our breakdown of revenues in our district shows. And local revenues where our property taxes come into play. So.
Okay.
See, a debt service is, like I said, it is the fund that where all the principal and interest payments are paid from. Okay. So, but it also is the fund where if you actually do a GO bond, a general obligation bond, that is where you collect the taxes is in that fund. So under general obligation bonds to pass, it requires a supermajority vote, which means 60% approval rating, 60% approval rating to pass it. So if you pass it at 55%, it doesn't pass. It has to be a 60%, and it cannot unless there's caps on how much you can levy. So without the patrons approving a second language on the ballot, the maximum amount you can levy is $2.70 per thousand of such taxable valuation. $2.70 per thousand taxable valuation. So if you say you have greater needs than that, you need to go beyond that, you have to have your voters pass a second ballot language item, which means giving the district the authority to go to $4.05 per thousand. And that only has to be done one time. Okay. Once you pass that, you never have to address it ever again as a district. And so Cedar Rapids has never passed a 405 limit. So we are capped right now at $2.70 if we were to pass a GO bond issue. In FY22 is the first year we haven't had a bond payment in a long time. This is the first time we haven't had any taxes associated with our bonds. That's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so now I'm going to jump into the general fund. So I'm going to go back a screen here, and we're going to go to general fund. But before I go into this right here to talk about some of this stuff, we're going to go into where we ended up at last year. Then we'll jump down into some of these other documents here. So I'm going to go into last year's, and we have that over here. I'm going to pull it up. So when we look at general fund, and can I do a full screen so we can see that better? Well, can you guys see that good enough? I'm just struggling to get that full screen view. Here we go. Show full screen. There we go. Here we go. All right. So this is what we gave a board an update on last board meeting. I will just go hit some highlights here. for all funds, we have a report here that kind of shows where we were. We brought in 353 million in revenue, and we spent 347 million. So in total, our revenues exceeded expenditures 6.6 million. You can see the prior year, it was reverse. Our expenditures exceeded revenues by 7.4. There's some reason behind that. And we talked a little bit about our last year, but this presentation highlights that a little bit. By fund, you can see where we set it up by fund. You can see our general fund ended up at 4.9 to the good. Sales tax fund ended up in the hole about 160,000, not in the hole, but we spent more than we brought in. Debt service did the same thing here. Our nutrition fund, which is a big issue, which has to do with, the COVID world that we lived in. That's part of that. And we also had a big increase in our IPERS, which is our retirement system, our liability we had to book, because nutrition fund operates and daycares funds operate as a like a business. We have to book that additional liability in the nutrition fund. So that kind of was about over $500,000 hit to nutrition fund. That's why we ended up kind of in the negative. So we'll go in here. When we look at these two, the highlights of why we ended up in the positive, why we ended up in the negative. If some of you tuned into the last board meeting, I did kind of go through this at the last board meeting, but in the general fund, you can see we had our revenues exceed expenditures by 4.9 million. Some of the reasons for that is that we had about $1.8 million from employees that were on leave and took or vacated positions during this COVID year. And because of the model which we were instructing a lot of our kids remotely, we did not hire back some of those employees because of the situation we were in. We were okay with, being able to manage at that time for that. We also saved about 1.2 million in utility costs because of the impact of the COVID and derecho. Some of our buildings were down for quite some time, and we had utilities either off or our air conditioning turned way down during that time. So we actually saved some money. We also, our buildings did not spend as much as they normally would in their building budgets that we allocate for them. So there was a savings about 1.1 million in that. And we also had about $430,000 of savings that we were able to shift for technology that was eligible to pay out of ESSER funds. So that all played into why we ended up in such a good position. A sales tax fund, we actually brought in an additional $16.5 million or so in GO bonds for the construction of Maple Grove Elementary School. So those are revenues that came in for GO bond revenues. Otherwise, this would have been significantly in the red because we issued 25 million in 2019 for the construction of West Willow. And so a lot of expenses occurred this year as well. And because we brought in the 16 million, that offset some of those expenses, even though we were actually spending quite a bit there. Debt service. Yes.
Dave, I want to interrupt you just a minute. The document we were looking at here was presented at the last board meeting, what,
Correct.
Monday? That would have been Monday. Okay. The document prior to that, is that on the website as well?
Correct. The prior document we were looking is on the website. Yes.
Both of them are.
No, this is not on the website. The prior document is from the website we were looking at.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
So, our debt service, we did have some delinquent property taxes, and I'm sure due to COVID, that we had, and that's kind of how I'm thinking our debt service is down. We still had enough balance in there to be able to make all of our debt payments and whatnot, but it was a little bit less than what we had previously. So nutrition fund, you can see that is down. Like I said, I talked a little bit about that. Our IPERS liabilities is probably the big thing that pushed it down a good chunk. But it was, salaries and benefits that we paid out with less billable days that played in because we didn't have school the full 179 days because of at all of our schools because of the derecho. We didn't start school until September 21st or something like that. We didn't start school somewhere in there which lost like pretty much a month of school due to the derecho. So that all plays into account of how why we ended up where we ended up. But if you compare that to last year, one of the big drivers, you can see general fund was in a negative. And the big drivers on that is most of that negative could be tied to special ed or ELL deficits. Majority of the general fund was from that. We spent more than what we were actually received in from the state to support those funds. And sales tax was also in the negative. And so we had sales tax financing. The sales tax fund was due to construction, and the debt service was part of the refinancing. The timing of having the funds came through the debt service to report the refinancing of some bonds that we had. And this next slide, really one of the things I wanted to highlight on this slide is how things can significantly change in the managed save fund. You can see that, man, we went from 7.4 million to 39 million. Well, why? How does that happen? Well, bonds, sales tax revenue bonds that came in for our project, we borrowed funds. That comes into sales tax. That's why you're seeing, when you see big numbers like that and say, you're having some pipe construction projects happening. That's why you see those dollars. And the next, end of this year, this will drop down significantly. And then the following year will drop down. Then, once we start back up on our master facility plan, you'll see another influx of revenue coming in for bonds. And then we'll spend that down when we can do the construction. Our activity fund is pretty stable. A general fund, we're back up to where we were and back in 2018. Like I said, a lot of that growth from 20 to 21 had to do with the circumstances that we were in, with having some ESSER funds, and with COVID and derecho, the impacts that it had on the district, that played into how we were able to jump back up to about a level we were in 2018. So general fund here, how it breaks down, when I talked about earlier, 30% of our revenue is local. Local revenues includes property taxes, tuition in, and those types of things kind of flow into local revenue. So when you're thinking about taxes, that is all considered local. Property taxes are. The state, even though some of our state aid is property taxes, okay, the state financial formula is property taxes. They get reported into local, and the state side, the state aid portion of it comes in the state side, obviously. Then we have a 7% in federal. This is actually higher than normal, and typically we're about 5% for federal, but it jumped up this last year because of our ESSER dollars that we received for the COVID efforts of dealing with and responding to COVID, and some of those dollars flow in that we received. That number will probably increase even more next year, percentage of our total breakdown of revenues. And this is one that we've always talked about, salaries and benefits in the general fund count for basically 80% of our general fund budget is salaries and benefits. That's pretty close across the state. It might fluctuate a percent or two, but it's pretty close across the state how much of your general fund budget is allocated for salaries and benefits. That's pretty standard. Our unspent balance is what the district has legal authority from the state to spend. So at the end of the year, how much money do you have that you have not tapped into that you have legal authority to spend? That's our unspent balance. So our goal is about between 5 and 10%, and we are at that, goal. We're at 10.16% at the end of 21, and we're about the same level we were in back in 2012. You can see that yellow line took some big hits and went down to very low amounts. This is scary low back in 2014. for unspent balance for the district legal authority. It has taken us several years to get back to that level. And so, but the thing is, we're kind of a reverse situation here. So in 2012, we had unspent balance of about 10%, but our fund balance, we didn't have enough funds to match our authority. Okay, so even if we we couldn't even touch our authority because we didn't have enough money. We could actually levy tax more to be able to increase our fund balance by taxing more, and that has happened. So over time, so we'll look at it after we'll go back in the other document, we'll kind of show where our cash reserve levies have been, and that actually has helped us get back to our to help cash flow, because back in these days, we were probably issuing what they call anticipatory warrants, borrowing from other funds within the district to make our summer payrolls. We didn't have enough money in our general fund to make our summer payrolls. We were either borrowing funds through anticipatory warrants, or we were borrowing funds within the district from other funds like SAVE or PEPL to make our payrolls and stuff in the summer, because we did not have the fund balance to do so. So there's a conscious effort to increase cash reserve levy to help our fund balance, which then also helped our solvency ratio to get to where it's at today. And like I said, fund balance is the amount that we have on hand after all of our current obligations are satisfied. When you close your books, that's the amount that we have on hand. And this is in percentage dollars, percentages. So our solvency ratio, you can see back in those years when our unspent balance was low, FY13, FY14, look where our solvency ratio, we were in the negatives for our solvency ratio in FY13. We finally went up, got back into positive, and so when you're in the negative, you get too far negative, I mean, you have to do workout plans with the school budget review committee and say how you can get out of that negative position. And so the district has done a great job in getting out and then being above. It's very important that we're above this 10%. Where we're at right now, it's really important to be kind of in that range because it really helps our bond ratings. When we're looking at issuing bonds, they look at our solvency ratio. They want to see a solvency ratio above 10%. You know, if you risk going down below that, you're looking at potentially having your bond ratings drop because of that. And district debt margin. There's, when we talk about the $2.70 or the 20405 and how much you can levy for projects and property taxes, there's also how much you have a legal authority to borrow. Okay, and this is the debt margin is a calculation that is used to determine how much how much debt that you can actually borrow, funds you can actually borrow. So it is calculated based on your total assessed valuation in the district. It's 5% of the total assessed valuation in your district, not taxable valuation. It's the 100% assessed value. So when you do that calculation, we have a debt limit of $547 million. When we take what we have outstanding right now, which we have all these bonds outstanding right now, we have you can see these are the most recent ones that we've issued. We issued some save revenue bonds here of 6.5, and then we issued some more back in November, about 9.9. So, and then you can see right here was our issue that we issued for our where is it, right? Our West Willow is in here, one of these right here. This was our West Willow bonds. Oh. So this is, where we have, so when we take that away, what we have already borrowed, we're down to 438 million. That is what we could actually borrow, but only to the limit of the 405. So I haven't done the calculation. If we did all of this, would we be beyond 405? Yeah, there's a good chance we could be, so we may be limited even before we hit that based on our the 405 limits for property taxes. So that is what was shared at the board meeting on the general fund. So I'm going to get out of this now and go back to this document. So before I go on, anybody have any questions before I kind of dive into this a little bit more? Okay. So on the general fund, we talked a little bit about this, but I want to talk a little bit more about our enrollment. Enrollment is the big factor of our budget. So October 1 is a big date. It's our count date. Last Friday was our count date to determine our funding for the next year. And so it takes into account your served students, and it looks at ours that has our students that are open rolled out to other school districts. They are still, we count them, but then we get the money, then we have to turn around and pay it out to another school. But when they're still on our coffers, we still count them. Then we look at tuition out students, open rolled out and tuition out. And then so we subtract the kids that we count in our enrollment that are for somebody else's students. We have to take those out because they're not our kids, they're another district students, to come up with our certified enrollment number, okay? So over the years, you can kind of see what our enrollments have done here. You can see our certified enrollment prior to this year, because this is not updated yet, but we did drop 614 kids. So if we're FY22, that number is 614 less than this number. So we dropped. And so that played a big impact on where we're at. But historically, you can kind of see where we've been, our numbers have been, certified enrollment numbers. And then you can actually see what the other piece of it is what the state gives us. We call that supplemental state aid. That's SSA for short. We do a lot of acronyms. The state legislature determines how much that SSA number is going to grow per year. So, SSA for last year was a little over 1% that the state gave, but for FY21 it was 2.3%, and then the year before that was 2.14. You can see the percentages. 4% down in 14-15 was 4%, but because our new money is a concept that a lot of schools use when you say new money. What's your new money? Well, it takes into account your enrollment impacts. It looks at your SSA, what the state did. If you actually have a larger number than this, that means you're a growing district, you have more students. That's going to push this number greater than your SSA number. But if you have a less, that means you have a declining enrollment, which actually lowered your SSA amount down. So we do take that into account. When we sit there and meet with our unions to talk about negotiations for the next year, what our available money is, we always look at our new money. So our new money is impacted by our loss of regular enrollment students and our net open enrolled out numbers. So you can see our, when we factor in our open enroll losses, our new money went from 1.77 down to 1.76 slightly. That all plays into the calculation when we're in our negotiation. New money is what we talk a lot about. So, so now when you're looking at our regular program cost per pupil, this is it's funded in different ways. Okay. For every district. So a property rich district versus a property poor district, you have the uniform levy, okay, is what every school district starts off with. It's $5.40. Every district gets that charge to fund the funding formula, school funding formula. State aid backfills up to 87% of the calculation of this times enrollment number. And they say you get state aid for that piece. The last bit of it is you have some additional property tax levy to go up to the fully to fund everything else. So when you look at a prop like a Cedar Rapids school, we're not at the very low end, but we're not at the high end anywhere. We're a little bit above we're just a little bit below average in our assessed valuation per pupil. That's the biggest driving component that changes this. It's the assessed valuation of property per pupil in the district. So like this district here, a big property rich district, I would say be like Osage. Okay. Osage district is a property rich, and they don't have a ton of students. You have a lot of people summer there, and they have a lot of homes there, but during the regular school year, the population drops significantly in Osage, but they are what I would consider a property rich district. So when you do $5.40, you can see like Cedar Rapids, we would of the per pupil, it funds about $1,800 per pupil. But a property rich district, it could fund $3,000, $4,000, or even more than that of the total cost of the regular program cost times the number of students. It can fund a lot of that. So there's the amount of state aid they get is a lot less. And then, so you can see this property tax relief payment. School districts that are of average or poor, they are getting some of their additional property taxes bought down. It's actually using save dollars. The state is using save revenue to buy down people's property taxes that have that poor assessed valuation per pupils districts with some of this save funds. So that is kind of how it kind of really looks when you're looking at your spending authority, how it differs from district to district, and how they receive their funding. Like say, when you look at an Osage, their state aid payments that they're getting would be a lot less than a Cedar Rapids would be. So that is a good part of that. The other thing that helps increase our supplemental state aid, you're looking at additional weightings. We can get special ed students, obviously give us additional weightings. We get additional weightings for LEP students, English as a second language. We get a 0.22 weighting. For special ed, if you're a level 2 student, a little more severe, you get additional 1.2 weighting for every student. If they're very severe, you're getting an additional $2.74 weighting for those students. That's how we get a lot of our funding. So, and I did talk a little bit about the budget guarantee. I can reiterate that again. Every school district can go on the budget guarantee to guarantee at least a 1% growth for property tax from the prior year. And it has to be approved by a board resolution to do that. But you can get a 1% growth if you're qualified for budget guarantee. And the other way you can increase your spending authority, because this is what this kind of is increasing spending authority, is grants. Additional investment interests and those types of things can increase spending authority. Those are considered miscellaneous incomes. Obviously, we're not in a time where investment income makes much of a difference for schools. We get very little interest income now. But there has been a time when it was, we got good rates of return on our investments, but we're not in that time right now. It's been a year since we've been in that way. Tuition, and you could just even, for example, you're talking school tuition, but you can also do things like schools. If we are transportation department, we have a great transportation department, and our mechanics, we have a great setup. If we were to repair some other school districts' buses or vehicles, that money would actually come in as a miscellaneous income, and that's how we can actually increase spending authority, even getting money from other districts and doing repairs on their vehicles. So we already talked about our unspent fund balance, so I'm not going to go into that, but I do want to talk a little bit about you know, comparing fund balance and unspent balance authority. So when you're looking at the unspent balance authority, ending fund balance, how they tie in together. So the best situation you want to have a positive fund balance and obviously a positive unspent balance. That's where you always want to be. You want to be in this quadrant here, but you can have a positive fund balance and a negative unspent balance. So that is one of the not a good place to be in because you don't have authority to spend it, but you do have money, but you don't have authority. Yeah. You overspent in the years past. You're sitting in a negative position, and when you're sitting in a negative position here, or any negative here, that's a big problem if you're spending more than what you have authority to spend. And there's been a district that has been shut down by the state due to that. So they don't mess around when you're sitting over here in a bad position, like say you're in a negative fund balance and a negative unspent balance. You can be in here and still be at risk of the state coming in and shutting you down, because if you're in such a bad negative position. So that has happened in the past. Mm-hmm. So now when we're looking at our unspent balance, you can see we're up at 13.92 that the other document showed. And you can kind of see where we want to be in. This is offered by IASB, what their guidance, Iowa Association of School Boards. This is kind of the best place they want us to be in, between 5 and 15. That's kind of where we're at right now. We are in that position. Our unspent balance is not quite that high. We are in both our unspent balance and solvency ratio. We are right here, and that's where we want to be. That's where we're striving to keep maintaining. This is where we're at. But there are some schools that are sitting at unspent balance authority at 25% or above. There are some schools out there that are doing that and have fund balances at that level. There are school districts that would say that over here. That's not. You're not doing what you should be doing as a school district. If you're sitting on all those funds and you have an unspent balance at that high, you need to be, those funds are there for a reason. Those funds are to be used for educating your kids. There's no reason why you should be over in the hair, but there are school districts that are over in this quadrant out there. So, and our property tax levy, right now we're at, you can see the general fund levy. We talked a little bit about components earlier where we're sitting. These are all last year's numbers. I'm not going to go a lot into that, last year's numbers, but other than there are like instructional support levy, there's a property tax component to that. So that's, and income surcharge tax levy. Here you're going to see our cash reserve levies. We talked a little bit about this. We have authority-backed levies for cash reserve. There are two forms. You got authority or an unbacked authority, which are cash flow purposes. And that is for SBRC, School Budget Review Committee, for special ed deficit, excess costs for our limited English proficient students, one-time enrollment funding, and infrequent unusual circumstances impacting the needs for additional spending authority. One-time enrollment funding, on-time enrollment funding. So if you have increased enrollment one year, but the count that you had last year did not, you didn't have them in there, but you grew 200 kids in a year, you can actually get some on-time funding to help support that additional expenses that you're incurring. And that's through School Budget Review Committee. They will award that. Or if you open a new building, you can actually go to the School Budget Review Committee and say, hey, we have all this extra cost because we opened up a new building. When I say, because we did not go to SBRC when we opened up West Willow this year, because basically the kids that were at Coolidge are at West Willow right now. But if we were a growing district like say Waukee, who builds a school basically every year, they're probably going to the SBRC and saying, man, we have all this added cost because we're having to hire all these extra teachers and all this extra stuff. And, we're opening up as a new building, but our enrollment, we're only funded at this level. We have all this extra cost. They can go to SBRC and get additional authority to do that. That's what the infrequent, unusual circumstances sometimes, or you could go, some people were talking about fuel costs that went so sky high in 1 year and trying to say that's infrequent and unusual circumstance to go. But those are very few and far between to be able to get the infrequent and unusual, meet that criteria is kind of hard. And you got to make sure, and the school budget review committee is not going to grant that to you unless it truly is infrequent and unusual. They won't apply grant it. So you can see our cash reserve levies that we've had. So remember the year when we were really we were in 13, 14, we were very low on our fund balances. You can see the cash reserve levy was increased quite a bit. We're at $2.70 for those couple years to try to build our fund balances up. That's how you build your fund balances quickly, is to a cash reserve levy. That's what happened. Okay. And so it stayed up high for a couple of years, then it went down just a little bit. And FY21, the main factors in our special ed deficit, our levies going up a little bit, is our special ed deficit. Our special ed deficit has been going up. Now, which leads me into the next spot here, special ed deficit. A special ed deficit is a big driver of our overall property tax. That is a big driver. We were at $12.2 million last year. And for FY21, it jumped up to 13.5 million. Okay, is our special ed deficit. So, and that is a big driver of our overall property tax because we do levy that back. Okay, you don't have to levy all of it. I think this for FY21, we did not do the full amount, but we did most of this, but we didn't do the full amount of that levy. But most of the time, the district does end up going back and levying for those added costs that we're paying for a special ed. And a lot of that is due to we don't get enough funding. Special ed deficits are prevalent across the state. There are very few school districts that actually have a positive balance, but there are some. Majority of the school districts are operating in a deficit mode.
Excuse me, Dave, but that's also, I'm just a little bit amazed. So that is even considering the additional weighting that's given to the.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
It is. It's it is, as in dollar amounts, I didn't look at this year yet, but I'm sure we're number one in the state in our overall deficit. I believe when you did it on a per pupil basis, we weren't number one. We were in the top 5 last year, but we weren't number one in the per pupil when you broke it down per pupil. But I'm sure we're still number one dollar rise. I don't know where we're at on a per pupil basis this year, but I'm sure we're still in the top 5, but I'm not sure if we pushed to number one or where we're at on that list.
So Dave, when you're talking, and I don't want to belabor it, but when we're talking open enrollment to another district, you couldn't game the system by beginning to open enroll special ed kids to a different district.
No, because that school district will turn around and bill you back for those kids.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay. Okay.
Yep. So our kids are our kids. So basically kids actually reside in our district, live in our district, whether they're served by us or whether they're served by another school district, we're paying the other school district. The only exception to that is our students that attend parochial schools. Yeah. So we don't pay the parochial school, but on special ed side, we still do support the kids that are on IEPs at those parochial schools. We still have to support those kids. So in fact, on a daily basis, we transport some kids back from our schools the parochial schools to our schools for some special ed supports
Mhm.
on a daily basis. And so that happens every day, and we transfer some kids from Xavier or from Regis or St. Pius or whatever to our elementary or middle schools or high schools for some additional special ed support, and that happens every day.
Okay.
So which drives some of our special ed costs,
Oh, I
because
see.
yeah,
Okay.
because that is expensive, when you're doing that.
But you're still those kids, and I'm not questioning the schools, you have to do it. I get that. But you're not getting, do you count them, those students for the SSA then?
Yes, so let's go back to this right here, up here. No, where is it? Enrollment. Was it? It must have been our other document.
That's right, Dave. I had not.
Yes, that is.
thought
Our
about
students
that.
always, so our tuition out students count in our certified enrollment number.
Yeah,
Our tuition out students count, and our tuition and kids that have been tuition in, we have to subtract them out of the count because we're counting every kid, every student's butt in the seats. We
okay.
count all those
Yeah.
kids. Okay. And then we add the additional weighting if they're special ed or whatever. But if they're another school district's kid, we subtract that off of our total number to determine our certified enrollment number. So they get subtracted off. But our students, like the same thing is like Limar College, they'll subtract off our students that are attending there, but we add them on to our list.
Okay. So
For
it's
funding.
balanced almost, yeah.
For funding.
Okay.
And one would argue it makes sense that the state just funds you with the kids that you are educating, and not have us turn around billing back and forth. Because it makes sense, but I'm not sure we're going to get there. But yeah, we're still billing back and forth, and we have to do that. But because I think it's all based on some of the property taxes, because you live in the Cedar Rapids School District, you're paying taxes. So I'm not sure we'll ever get that where we just receive money for the students that we're serving and not have to do open enrollment billings. But I think that's going to remain. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. All right. That's on the general fund side. So now let's just jump down to some of these other ones we'll go through pretty quickly. Our student activity fund, it's funded through fundraising, gate receipts, and the donations that happen. That's how our student activity funds really is funded. Typically, in a typical year, you cannot, there are only certain things that you can actually transfer general fund dollars into the student activity fund for. Protective equipment is one of those things. When you say protective equipment, you're talking about helmets, shoulder pads, knee guards, and those types of things you can actually fund with the general fund. But you're supposed to transfer those dollars into the student activity fund to make those purchases, okay? But this year, because of COVID, the legislature passed a bill that allows school districts to make a transfer. Because of COVID, schools' gate receipts were way down because you had less, you limited the people to be able to go in to the events. And in some instances, you may not have anybody. But so they realized that the student activity fund was taking a big hit. You're still having to pay your coaches. You're still paying your officials. You're still doing all of that stuff, but you don't have the revenue to support that. So they grant districts the ability, based on a board authorization, to make a transfer to support the student activity funds for operating deficits that they would have within the different sports or clubs or programs that they have. So I think this year the board authorized about $160,000 transfer from the general fund to student activity fund to support the deficits that existed this past year. And they're actually allowing you to do that for 3 years. So FY21, FY22, and FY23. They're going to allow school districts to take a look at everything and see if there was any deficits due to COVID and what the circumstances around that, to allow districts to make some transfers. Typically, that is not allowed. So,
But Dave, when you say they, who is that? They, the legislature?
the
or
legislature
the
passed a
that-
bill to allow that to happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's
Otherwise,
only 3 years, right?
yep, for 3 years. Yep.
Okay.
Otherwise, there could be a chance that the programs could be in a deficit mode, and it's going to be hard for them to get out of it in the deficit. So that was we were very appreciative they did that. We were lobbying very hard to give us some abilities to help support that. We were really hoping that we could use ESSER funds for that, but in fact that no, ESSER funds, I mean, yeah, if we bought some masks and hand sanitizers and that stuff, we use ESSER funds to buy all that type of stuff, but we could not use ESSER funds for lost revenue in student activity.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we could not do that. It's general fund dollars, and we don't get authority. Additional authority for transfer that money over there, or that loss authority that we're sending money out. We don't get that, but we were all just thankful that we were still able to do it, just to be able to support them. So you can kind of see the breakdown where we've been. Our student activity fund has been pretty steady. Yeah, we did drop some, but I think we dropped our fund balance. Actually, no, it grew just slightly, just because of the $160,000 funds that we transferred. But it was maybe $40,000 if I remember right. It didn't grow very much. So we're pretty steady where we're at with our student activity fund. We go to management fund. Like I said, we talked about what our management fund, what it's used for. It's 100% property tax set by the board, and it's used for unemployment, property insurance, and workers' compensation and early separation. Those are our main things that we use it for. So you can see where we spend about $2.5 to $2.8 million a year on early separation payments for staff that retire early. So, and then you can see kind of where we're at for workers' comp. We're at approaching $2 million, a little over $2 million a year on work comp payments we pay out of working comp, and our unemployment has been pretty steady, but and when we look at FY21, I believe actual numbers, it was increased, which we'll show that when we get this thing updated. You can see where our fund balance has been. We've had some very low fund balances here, and we have made a conscious effort to kind of try to build that back up. And so we're sitting at a good spot right now for the management fund for fund balance, to support all of those initiatives. So any questions before I go on?
And to talk about what we discussed earlier, it's the management fund that we're hoping the state will eventually become more liberal in their interpretation of Dillon Light, or whatever it's called now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. A home rule light. Yep.
Yeah. All right then.
Yeah. It's a risk. This is what we use to, kind of deal with risk of the district. So.
Okay. All right. Good. And we may hear next month from your discussion you were going to have, right?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Yep. Save. So that's our Secure and Advanced Vision for Education Fund formerly known, it was the Local Option Sales Tax Fund, or SILO. That's when it was passed. Some of you probably remember that vote. That's when it was passed. It was SILO before. Johnson County and Lynn County were the last two counties in the state of Iowa to pass the local option sales tax vote. Okay. And the state, because we did pass it, it was at that point in time, the state, after the first year, I think, or two, the state then said, everybody has it. Let's just now make that a state tax. So that's when it shifted from a local option sales tax to a state 1 penny tax for school infrastructure. That's when that happened, after every county got it. So it is a penny tax, and it is, all schools get it. There are a couple counties that actually had 2 rounds of the sales tax money. I think it was maybe 10 years. That levy was levied for 10 years. You had Polk County was one, and I'm trying to remember the other one off the top of my head, and I can't right now, but Polk County for sure was one of the counties that passed it twice, and they got to keep all the money within the county. And they didn't have to participate in the statewide penny until they got through their 2 10-year periods. And then that money rolled into the program. So it's all based on enrollment. Okay. And and our save allocation for FY21 was just a little over $1.18. And this year it jumped up to I think it jumped up another $88, if I remember right. FY22, it jumped up to, a little bit more than that, $116. So that number did jump up, which we're thankful, especially because our enrollment went down. The per pupil amount went up. So in fact, we actually are seeing more dollars this year than we saw last year. So that was a good thing. How was it used? When you take a look at historically over the years we've had it, we have had about 48% of that has been used for facility construction and acquisition renovations. Debt payment is about 34% of that is pay off the debt that we borrowed to do some of this work. You can see about 7.5 or 7.3% is for technology. We have some facility leases we pay. We have some vehicle repair. And we did have a good part of this. We had like 40 some million dollars that was used for buying down on property tax levies. And we used, and that has since expired. Since when we first passed it, we said that's what we're going to do. We met our commitments. So now the dollars now, we're still using for technology. We're still doing our leases. We're still doing some non-instructional software and those types of things. We still are funding some of that with SAVE, but the majority of the funds moving forward is going to be for the new elementary school construction. So we'll cash flow some of that, and we will borrow for some of that. For Maple Grove, we're actually cash flowing about $10 million of that estimated construction cost with SAVE dollars. So that's how we're kind of planning to doing that in futures. I think some of our future schools will probably be a combination of cash flow versus bond, SAVE revenue bonds. There are 2 committees that are kind of tied into the SAVE. They're tied to the SAVE plan. And it's also, they're tied into PEPL as well on the Facility Oversight Committee. But these are 2 main committees that are board appointed committees. We have Technology Oversight Committee and the Facility Plan Oversight Committee. And so some of the SAVE projects and the PEPL projects are overseen by Facility Master Plan Oversight Committee. And technology is basically the technology plan and how we're spending our funds that we have allocated in SAVE. They help guide the funding of the spending of those dollars. I did want to talk about, our facility master plan a little bit. And so this is a nice summary that we've incorporated into this document here for the line item budget to talk about what are we doing. And this is just a quick synopsis of that. So the master facility plan, it was a multi-year process, and they're like, I want to say there was over 45 members of the committee and that participated and to do this, but it was ultimately it ended up saying that we are going to construct 10 new elementary schools. We're going to renovate 3 of our elementary schools, and we're going to phase out 8 of our elementary schools because a lot of our elementary schools are small, capacity 300 capacity elementary school, maybe 2 section, 1 section, 2 section buildings, very small, and they cost a lot to when you to operate those smaller schools, because you have your nurses, you have your guidance counselor, you still have your principals, you still have that support staff, and so we're looking at going to bigger elementary schools to support that. So, and right now we have Coolidge and Jackson, and Truman, which is down here, we're in that first round or first phase of the project. Okay, so Coolidge opened up this fall. Jackson's gonna Maple Grove is opening up next fall. Truman will be integrated into both West Willow and Maple Grove in FY22. So phased out, we're not saying demolish, it's being repurposed, phased out, repurposed. So we don't know what all these schools will be, and we don't know necessarily if we will actually end up doing this with all the schools. We're phasing them out, but we know Truman is getting phased out as a regular attendance center for elementary schools. Okay, it may still have another purpose for the district, but that has not yet been totally set. And so this is a kind of 10 to 20-year plan that it will take us to fully implement, and it all is going to be predicated on our funding and our ability to move the plan forward using our saved dollars borrowing capacity that we can meet and meet our borrowing requirements that we need to make sure we have the funds available to make our payments.
If I may, Dave, I was on that committee.
Yeah.
I always thought the board, when the board adopted it, they were very wise. They decided to do do 5 schools. They thought at that time, maybe they could change it and then take a step back. Yeah. Which is kind of nice to evaluate what they want to do. And I always thought that they were very wise to do that. I mean, we were just saying these should be, the new school should happen. But it's kind of nice to see how it all came together, or underway, I guess to say, but it's exciting.
Yeah, we are actually in what we're calling the phase period. We are in the phase period right now. Yeah. Because if we were going to move forward with a 3rd elementary school, we would be in the design phase right now, going out for bid here in December or January for that new elementary school. We're not in that. We're in our kind of pause period. We're trying to define what are our next schools that are going to be tackled yet. Because everything that we put out initially, we had some phases that were identified, like phase 2, Arthur, Harrison, Cleveland, Pierce, Erskine, Wright. We're not sure which ones that we're going to tackle. We really don't. And so what I would love to be able to do, because we'll be reconvening a committee to really try to identify this, even though it will not be hammered in stone, but I'd love to be able to say, okay, here are the orders in the next schools that we would like to tackle and have that identified. Because what's really difficult for our buildings and grounds department, and John Galbraith, our manager for that department, is that when you're looking at needs of facilities, how we're using our PEPL dollars, because we actually, when we passed PEPL, we had a PEPL promise, what we called. These are the projects we're going to tackle. These are our needs. This is what we're going to do. Well, it's really hard to spend money. You don't want to spend money and then 2 years from now that you spent $5 million or $2 million on renovating, doing something, and then you tear that building down, or that building gets repurposed and not used anymore as a school. And so we don't, it's really hard to say, okay. And so we've been looking at the plan, moving things forward for different buildings that was planned out to be a different time, because we were slated to do this. It doesn't necessarily make sense to do a bathroom renovation right now until we know whether or not when that building is going to be in the mix to be repurposed.
Yeah.
So if it's 10 years from now, when it's on the list, absolutely, we would do the bathroom renovation. But if it's 2 years from now, it probably doesn't make sense to spend $500,000 doing a bathroom renovation in that building. So it's very difficult. So we would love to be able to say, here's what we think are the next schools in the order in which they would happen, because that would give him something that he could use to determine what projects that we need to move forward with or kind of delay. So our fund balance, like I said, our fund balance, you can see it can be really high and then drop way down. It's all predicated on getting bonds. If we receive bonds, it's going to go into save. And that's where it goes, and we spend it down in construction. So this is probably back in the day, we did a lot of HVAC upgrades through the district, geothermal. Viola Gibson was built maybe a little bit before that, or close to this time frame when we built Viola Gibson. And so that's why you see all of these higher dollar amounts here, but then they drop way down. Now we issue some more debt to do future projects.
Dave, I have to say too, that when we're talking about the facilities plan, I was kind of not amused. It's not the right word, but this week the headlines were Roosevelt Middle School celebrated its 100th anniversary.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, you see, those were the kind of headlines we wouldn't have exactly embraced
Right.
during the facility planning thing. But.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So physical plant equipment levy, we talked a little bit about that. It's like voter approved levy and the board approved levy. $1.34 is the max you can do a voter approved. 33 cents is the max that board can set annually. For a lot of years, we were at 33 cents. And there were a few years, it was actually, the board actually levied less than 33 cents. They were few and far between, but when I would look at historical records, I did see a few years that were less than that. So when we're looking at how can be used for it, like we touched briefly on that before, you can be building maintenance, repair, safety upgrades, roof, asphalt, masonry, bus and maintenance vehicles. This is, like I said, this is Viola Gibson. Was our most recent elementary school that was built. And the plan was based on facility needs and ratings analysis conducted in 2012. And when the facility master plan was looking at data, that's what they used to help determine. And this is kind of what the committee went through, and they had said, looking at each of our conditions of our school district, what kind of condition they were in. And you can see the years they were built for all our elementary schools and what kind of condition they were in, whether borderline satisfactory and whatnot, and did the same thing with the middle schools and high schools. Obviously, all of our middle schools, they got very strong bones. They do. I mean, those buildings are solid. They're, but are they 21st century? No, they're not. So there's a lot of work that would need to happen in a lot of our middle schools to make it, up to the larger classroom, the larger spaces, more open type of concepts and things of that nature that our newer elementary schools have. Our schools have, you have those type of spaces. So when we're doing a needs assessment right now, our board actually approved OPN to do a needs assessment of all of our facilities, secondary schools, to determine needs that go from the outdoor athletic facilities to all of our indoor buildings, and what improvements are needed and how much estimated cost that we think those improvements would take, so that when we are ready to put a vote in front of the people, we have numbers that we can back what we're asking for.
Excellent. That's excellent.
And
Yeah.
so we're actually moving forward with that. And because even with the master facility plan discussions that has happened, middle schools and high schools were part of that just briefly, especially in assessing
Yeah.
needs.
Yeah.
But it was always known that those types of projects were going to have to be funded with general obligation bonds. There
Yeah.
wasn't going to be the money in it saved to be able to do all of that too. So you can kind of see where our fund balances have been, and it did grow about 2 million this year as well, our fund balance for PEPAL fund. And so, but next year we just had a master facility oversight committee meeting on, was that Monday? I think it was, yeah, Monday. We had that, the days kind of just blurred together, and where we're kind of setting the projects for this upcoming summer. And so it looks like we will spend, we're budgeting to spend about 2 million of that fund balance for this next year, to spend some of that down. Nutrition fund, it's basically self-explanatory. Basically, it's self-supported. With fees, well, I guess it was from state as federal subsidies, but it's totally pretty much, we have a little state, but mostly federal funds right now, because it's all kids can eat for no charge right now under started with COVID, and that's still in place for all of this year. So now, do we collect some fees? Absolutely, we do. We collect some fees for a la carte, especially at the high school level. We have some a la carte things that we do collect from kids, and kids can actually get a second meal, and we would collect for that. When adults eat, that's still charged for adults, so we are still collecting some fees, but majority of it is funded with federal funds. So, and so basically, we had some of our buildings that were called CEP, qualifying schools. We had several schools that were not charged. Now our entire district is not charged right now. So, which has made it nice in the situation of because of the derecho and the things that we were dealing with, to not have to track in the way we normally would. It was just all we had to do, keep track of the number of meals that we were sending out. And so with our grab and go sites and all of that, it didn't necessarily matter if they were our students from our district or a student from Linmar or College Community. It didn't matter as long as they were going to kids. They just went out and we could count on them. So that was very nice.
Yeah.
So right now, we actually had 21 of our 31 schools did qualify for CEP. So we had a large part of our district we weren't charging for, but very few of our, you had Jefferson was our only high school that was in the mix. So, if you were in one of these elementary schools and going through, say, Roosevelt, and then going on to, or going on Wilson, I'm not, McKinley. I'm not sure whichever I'm drawing a blank which one actually flows into McKinley, goes to the wash. So if you end up going to McKinley and then go into go from Grant Wood to McKinley to Wash, you might have been free. You didn't have to pay anything in elementary, middle school. It could be a really rare for a family going to Wash. And wait a second, I had to pay now? I never had to. And we run into that. We have run into that in years past. So it's kind of nice that we're in a situation where we don't have that requirement anymore for this year. So
For this year.
So when we look at our fund balances, when we're looking at our, these are our fund balances for our nutrition fund. And when we take out our pension liability for FY21, I haven't done that number for FY22. I can't remember what that number is, but we are actually sitting at about $4 million in FY21 when we took out our pension liability out of the mix. And why we do that is because we're required to book that on our financials, but it's it is something that we would never plan on making sure that we had enough funds to make sure we meet that, especially on our daycare side. Daycare, they're actually in a negative when you put that in there, because it's a potential liability for future liability that we always cover the current liability with our which is our IPERS payments every year. We cover that every year, but they want us to, the potential shortfall that the state has in funding IPERS, that's what every school district has to book, some of that liability. And so for our proprietary funds, nutrition, daycare, we actually have to book it. For all our other funds, it's put it on the government-wide statements. It's just on our annual report, but it's not, we don't have to actually book the expenses on our day-to-day operations expenses. It's just on the government-wide reports that we have to file for our audit. It's included there, but it's not what we send to the state report, for instance. That's not booked there. It's only IPERS, it's only school nutrition fund and daycare funds where we book that.
Dave, I'm going to give you the 5-minute warning at least.
Yep, and this is perfect because I'm like just about done.
Okay.
The last fund we're going to talk about is our daycare fund. We actually had 2 daycares funds that we were dealing with. It was Five Seasons Daycare and our and Collins Aerospace was the other one with a 2080 agreement. That actually got closed out. Collins Aerospace went another direction during the course of this last year, so we were able to shift everything over there, and at the end of the year we're merging any remaining liabilities or whatever we had. We merged everything together, and so at the close of the start of FY22 school year, we only have 1 daycare program,
Right.
and that is our Five Seasons. So which is you know, kind of nice that we don't have to try to manage that. I mean, I know it's a lot of additional work for HR. I know it's a lot of additional work for accounting and to deal with another daycare. Now we only have 1. So it's kind of nice. So as we look at fund balances, you can kind of see where we were here down below here. We also have the IPERS adjustment out. So we can see here we were in negative, a fund balance that should be a positive, but we were actually in a fund balance of negative position of $880,000. We take out the IPERS liability out of that, we were in the pot. Then we actually had just over $1 million in FY21. And so, and we would still be positive this year as well. FY22, I mean, FY21, this is FY20 actual, and we were still in the positive in the FY21 as well. So that is going through all of our kind of highlights of how school finance and the different funds and what they're used for and kind of where we're at. Does anybody have any questions?
Nicely done, Dave. Thanks for walking through all that.
We expect you all to know everything. Yes.
Be a test next time.
There's a reason why you were appointed for 3 years. Thanks, Dave.
You bet.
And then we'll see you all next month in November.
Right. Yep.
Excellent.
All right.
Have a good month.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.